We are back with another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. I'm your host, Ben Domenech. You can email us, as always, at radio@thefederalist.com. Follow us on Twitter at FDRLST. I am happy to be joined once again by someone who has become a holiday-related tradition here at the Federalist Radio Hour, and that's Christopher Kimball from Milk Street. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, Christopher.
I've always wanted to be a holiday tradition. Yes.
Well, you certainly are now for our listeners. And I have to say, the things that you've been producing at Milk Street, especially over the past year, have been of enormous help, I think, to a lot of people who've discovered this year that they need to figure out something in their kitchen other than as a place to store leftovers. Tell me, in terms of the experience at Milk Street during this period, have you had a shift in the questions that you're getting, the responses from readers and the like, that seems tied to people rediscovering what it's like to cook at home?
Well, we came out with an Instant Pot cookbook right when COVID hit, which was timely. And I've actually done a lot of cooking in the Instant Pot, believe it or not. So there was a lot of interest in that. And that it's a way of organizing your cooking, right? So that things are all done in time and all goes in the pot. And so I think that's been a lot of help for people. And for me, even I use it, and I don't like those kinds of appliances in general. I think there's been a lot of interest in reusing things. You cook on Sunday and repurposing items. But I would say overall, just more interest overall. I think it's not like people are no longer interested in, a recipe from Ho Chi Minh City or Dakar. There's still that interest. But I would say a little more interest in reusing what you have. Yeah, a little more.
You mentioned the Instant Pot, and that's one of the questions that I actually got a lot from our readers and listeners in anticipation of this interview, was them both working to discover that and curious about just the nature of how that's changed cooking. Since you say you've been using it more yourself, how has it changed your own approach when it comes to preparing?
Well, it's just a way, as I said, of organizing your prep in time, because it's all got to get into the pot before you turn it on. So most recipes you might prep in 3 or 4 different increments. You saute, you do this, you put it in the oven. It all occurs in one place. So it's a way, like a slow cooker, it's a way of you thinking about how to organize your meal a little bit better. So I think that's helpful. I think it's also helpful in that you start to see the underlying recipe concept. For example, Darawat is an Ethiopian recipe. It's basically onions and spice and some kind of protein or whatever. But you start to see in the Instant Pot, I put a bunch of onions in and I put a bunch of spice in and some water. And then I put in some chicken or pork or something, whatever I want, greens, and I cook it for 40 minutes and I'm done. So the Instant Pot, you start to see patterns evolve, right? Mm-hmm. It's a good way of getting to understand what's really going on in cooking, because being Instant Pot, it's easier to see the patterns. You can have improvising dinner. Now I know if I got 3 onions, a few tablespoons of spice, some water, and whatever else I have, that just goes in the pot and I'm done. So I think it's helpful to see what's really going on under the surface.
There have been shortages and challenges for people a little bit during this period, depending on where they live. I've heard from a number of my friends who bake regularly that they had difficulty finding yeast and the like. As we see maybe sadly a period of more lockdown or potentially more shutting down emerging at the moment, what are some of the things that people should be mindful of if maybe they got through the previous experience without having to find things? What should they be ordering now, just in a general sense?
Besides takeout? Well, here's some things that really are great. Canned beans, dried beans are great. Grains are great. Those are terrific. We keep all-purpose flour and cornmeal probably in the refrigerator because it lasts longer that way. I would have some powerful pantry staples. Some things I like are harissa, which is a pepper paste from North Africa. That works on everything. You put on a sandwich, you can put anything. Things like gochujang, which is a spicy red paste from South Korea. 2 tablespoons of that in any stew is just a go-to. Really good vinegar on hand, because then you don't have to worry about whether you're good at making vinaigrette because the vinegar does the work for you. I use a lot of canned tuna, really good stuff though, because that's really great. And spices, definitely make sure you have some spice mixes like sitar, that kind of thing, are really wonderful. Za'atar, which is a wild thyme in the Middle East, and they mix it with sesame seeds and sumac and some other things. It goes on everything. It goes on eggs, goes on chicken. It just goes with vegetables. So having those around is really helpful. Having a really good like smoked salt or sea salt, those are things that really are terrific. So some of those pomegranate molasses is a classic Middle Eastern thing. It's sweet and sour. It can balance a soup or a stew. So those are just some of the things I like to keep around.
I'm really happy that as you were going through that list, at least 3 of those things were things I used for the first time, really in significant amounts this year. Gochujang in particular, I think, is something that people might seem intimidated by it at first, but it's just fantastic. And so
well, you can take a shoulder pork roast, boneless roast, throw it in an Instant Pot with 2 tablespoons of gochujang, or in a Dutch oven, a low oven, 300-degree oven, 350-degree oven, with a little bit of liquid, etc., and just cook it for 3 hours and come back. It's phenomenal. Chickpeas is another thing. Canned chickpeas, you can use canned, to make hummus and to make a million other salads and stuff. Those are great.
You mentioned at the beginning ordering takeout. I know that Americans, really have been hit so hard by seeing so many restaurants go under, and I'm sure that just given your work in this industry, you have to have many friends who've been hit by this hard. What are the things that people can actually be doing to support the restaurants that they love beyond just ordering from them? Because I think that there's a lot of folks out there trying to kind of say that they're part of philanthropic support for the industry and the like, but I don't think people have a clear idea of what they can really do other than order or buy alcohol because they know that the margin will be, better in terms of helping.
Well, first of all, you're right. It's a massacre. I mean, it's terrible. As you know, the restaurant business is a very low margin business, 3 or 4%. No restaurants have cash on hand. This is not General Motors, right? They have high rents. The labor costs have gone up a lot in the last few years. They have a lot of debt, for the equipment. So they're not set up to go even 2 or 3 weeks without selling 80% of their tables. So it's a mess. I just talked to Jonathan Waxman in New York at Barbudo, about this. And, he doesn't really know how it's all going to end up. And here's a guy who's been in the business, since the 70s.
Yeah.
And so one thing I have noticed is some restaurants have turned into grocery stores because they have supplier relationships. So a friend of mine owns a bakery 2 blocks from my house, and you can buy oysters from him, and you can buy chicken from him, and you can buy arugula and everything else. So eggs, and he now is cooking some food as well for takeout. So I use him as a grocery store, really more than I use a grocery store. So to those people who have turned into grocery stores, buy from them. I mean, it's going to be more expensive, but the quality's better. And that's the one thing you can do for those people who are offering that service.
My wife has lived in New York for I guess 18 of the last 20 years or 17 of the last 20 years. And so because of that, she had, so many favorites of hers, little places that went under. And, I'm sure that you have your own, priorities when it comes to the places that you'll miss the most. I'm curious about that, but I'm also curious about what people can do on the other side of this to help these different people come back, to the extent that they have a connection to the restaurants in the community, and the people who, helped make the food that they loved for so many years. How can they help those like neighborhood places come back? Because I think we focus on, the places that are famous and that are, tourist focused or have, a prominent name attached to them. It's when, the thing that is often lost the most. I know for my own, sake, the French place that's just a block away that has been, such a regular, place for us to go for years. I was very worried about and then very happy when they opened up again about 3 months ago. So that's, I think, the kind of thing where people are concerned and they'd like to help.
I was talking to Axon about this, and I think what's going to happen is what you said: the casual local places that really serve the community. They're part of your family almost, right? You have birthdays there, anniversaries, parties. I think they will come back more so than the five-star restaurants. I think the question is, will people want to spend now hundreds of dollars for two on a meal like the way they used to? I think people are now more confident at home cooking. I think people are going to think a little harder about how much money they spend outside the home, because now they have money to spend on fixing up their kitchen or on whatever. So I think the low to mid moderate price restaurants that are serving a community, like his Barbudo does, that are casual, where you can go if you want a couple times a week or 3 times a month, and it's not extravagantly priced. I think they're the places that will survive, and I would definitely support those, because the restaurants that support your community are the most important restaurants, right? I mean, that's the heart and soul of where you live, your neighborhood. So I would put a premium on those places, and as soon as they open or as soon as you can take takeout, I would put my money there. Whether the big expensive places survive, that's another question. I don't know.
So if that luxury dining kind of side of things takes a hit, what does that do or change going forward in terms of the way people think about dining out? Do you think that that's something that sticks beyond vaccines and things, or like, has this had that kind of long-ranging effect where people might think of that in a different capacity when they don't feel as much as if the good times rolling is a permanent thing?
If I knew that, Joe Biden would hire me cabinet position immediately. I think the question is, how wealthy are people going to feel in the next 2 years, right? I mean, I see the economy as being challenged, to put it mildly, and I don't think people are mentally going to feel like they're in good times anytime soon, which means they're probably going to cut out extravagant spending like that. I mean, that's the kind of thing really expensive vacations, really expensive restaurants, you probably will pull back on that and support the local place. So I think it'll be a while, it's like, the roaring 20s after the 1918 epidemic. It took time. I think it'll take a couple of years before we start feeling like whether we have the money or not, doesn't matter, but we feel like we can afford to go out and do that. I think it'll take some time, but I have no idea.
So
like everybody else.
I want to ask you a media question before I get to a ton of practical questions about cooking that I have a long list of them. I'm sure that you're aware of the bizarre, I guess, Condé Nast situation regarding Bon Appetit. I'll confess my own sort of bias here, which is that I enjoyed the Bon Appetit YouTube channel and everything they were doing with it, not as advice about food, but as kind of entertainment with food as a side thing, where you might learn a thing or two along the way. Oh, that's interesting. But it was the personalities and the way that it's like a sitcom.
They did a great job.
Yeah. And it had this very natural feel to it, even if I'm not sure, how natural it was, but Brad Leone in particular, just as I had never thought of sort of someone doing it that way, but it was hilarious and engaging. To see the place fall apart over these different controversies saddened a lot of myself and a lot of friends of mine. I know they're trying to make some kind of comeback. The initial videos that they did, I watched a couple of them, had this kind of tension and sadness to them, where it seemed like people were walking on eggshells. What was your take on that whole situation?
Well, I think you have to divorce the videos like Brad's videos and the other people, Claire, and other people who are fabulous. And she's trying to replicate, Fig Newtons, right, in a kitchen. And Brad's, making kimchi and spilling it all over the floor and everything else. They're great. And I think you have to divorce what they did, which was terrific. I mean, they're both terrific, from the magazine and the brand and the recipes and the other problems. So I think they're two different houses there, right? And so I don't think one really has much to do with the other. I think there are two things you have to do. you have to provide context for recipes now, so you understand where it comes from and why. And two, you have to give credit, right? So if it's inspired by somebody, you have to say who that person was and do that. You can't just pluck things out and mix everything together. So I think if you provide context and give credit, I think you're fine. I think that's reasonable. Everyone knows what stealing is, right? Stealing is when you take something that somebody owns and use it for your own purposes to make money. That's stealing. And so that's a very clear thing. But with a culture, if you give credit and context, I think that's what people are asking for. And you need to do that. I think when you play fast and loose with that, you get into trouble. And I don't think it's very hard to do that. I mean, we really try hard to provide that context. And we try to actually travel to go to the place as much as we can. So we've actually been there. But that being said, at the end of the day, a recipe is not a painting, it's not a sculpture, it's not a song. It's there's no copyrights on recipes. I think, does anybody own the taco or the quesadilla or the mollete? No. But if you're going to go down to Oaxaca and spend a week and cook with somebody, you sure bloody well ought to explain that what you did and who the person was and give credit to them, right? So I think it's just giving credit where it's due and providing context to explain, Dora Wat in Ethiopia, here's why they cook it, here's what it is. It's really a sauce, what's going on. And then if you want to adapt it, that's fine. Because adaptation is necessary. You can't take an authentic recipe somewhere else in the world and expect to make it here because everything's different. The water's different, the flour's different, the ingredients are different, the spices are different. It's never going to be authentic. But you need to at least be clear about your starting point, what your inspiration was, who you talked to. So I think that's what's necessary. And I think that's a reasonable expectation.
Well, that's something that obviously leads to your own focus at Milk Street in the sense that you're constantly giving context for, having come from the world of, for so many years focusing on traditional American cuisine and cooking and making the best version of these staple meals and dinners for the family. You've now branched out into so many other more exotic and foreign-based, cultural different things and looking at them in different ways. That was such a controversial element of the conversation around Alison Roman and around some of the other controversies that we've seen where it comes to accusations of cultural appropriation and the like. From my perspective and the perspective of many people I know, all food is cultural appropriation. And so there's no real way to get around that. And, to your suggestion that the credit itself is sufficient, there's another side though, that basically says, when you use this in some way, it's theft of my culture. It's doing something that's morally wrong or the like. I just don't see that, I guess. I don't understand, anyone who would be offended by that as being something that is at the core of their existence in the same way. Why do you think that that's become such an element of controversy within the food world and media?
Well, if you go back historically to when I started cooking in the 60s and 70s, Paula Wolfert would go to Morocco and live there and do a book. Or we have, there's one book on Indian cooking, or there's Diana Kennedy in Mexico, or et cetera. So we were taking these foods that we thought were ethnic, a term I don't like. Everything was very exotic, right? And that going back to those times where you're presenting someone else's culture and recipes through your lens, okay, that was not ideal. But as we've gotten a little more sophisticated, I think we want to understand that better and not put this food. The problem is you don't want to put this food on this pedestal of being exotic. If you travel around the world, everybody's has the same thing. They got to put dinner on the table every day, right? So with the place I think we should get to is, it's not exotic. It's just like someone's cooking dinner in Taipei or Chiang Mai or Dakar, right? I mean, you get in their kitchens look like your kitchens half the time. You know, Lagos has 20 million inhabitants, for example, right? So, you know, it's not that different. It's just a different mindset about what cooking is. So my feeling is, if you travel around the world and you do it as a student, right? They're the expert, you're the student. And what you're getting from them is not their authentic recipe. You're trying to understand how they think about cooking. So when you come back, you're not replicating what you found. You're going like, oh, I see. You're combining these two things. You're making a chicken soup in Somalia, which has crunchy and hot sauce instead of the American version. I see. So that's what's going on there. So you're trying to get at the underlying techniques and ideas. Now that seems to me a reasonable thing to do, because you're coming back here and saying, look, I want to help change the way you cook or think about cooking. And why don't we talk about how they think about this in Japan, or how they think about this in Thailand, or how they think about this in Morocco? Here's how they think about it. And that's an educational experience. You know, Julia Child, you could say, appropriated French recipes from Simone Beck, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, you could say she's the ultimate cultural misappropriation.
Totally.
Right, totally. But what she did was teach people in America with a supermarket chicken from America how to make coq au vin when they had a 4-year-old, you know, male chicken. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's a totally different bird. You have to cook it differently. So what she said was, okay, here's how to do it. Here's how to do that here. She was translating. Mm-hmm. And so I think translation is perfectly reasonable as long as you give credit. And the other thing is, I'm sorry, but there is no such thing as a recipe for hummus. I mean, please. I mean, if you go to Jerusalem, you know, it's garlicky. If you go to Tel Aviv, it's warm and whipped. And if you go to anybody's household, they're going to argue with you about how to make hummus, right? I mean, everybody's got a different recipe. Everyone's got a different spice mix in northern Israel, you know. So you can do kofta, you can do anything you want, and you're going to find, you know, make chlayutas, you know, the big tortillas that have the black beans and the pork lard and everything else. I mean, there's a million ways of doing it. So there is no such thing as, it's not a painting. Mm-hmm. It's a million variables, million variations, and everyone across the world will argue about how to make butter chicken in Mumbai. There's not one way. Someone does it with, like, use walnuts or something to thicken it, you know, and somebody else does something else. So there is no one thing. And if you think about history, I mean, the Spanish arrived in Mexico and they brought frying, right? Or then you have the sort of the ancient Aztec influence, and, you know, then you have the Pacific coast. And so you have all these cultural mixes, Portuguese food, everything else is all thrown together. And you can see, like, Creole food, how many different cultures, mm-hmm. French, Spanish, Native American, African American, you see all that together. So everything's changing all the time. It's not set in stone. So I think what we need to do is not put it on a pedestal. You're just cooking with people, have them teach you some of the ways they think about food, give them credit where credit's due, and be honest about that, provide the context, and then say, look, here's how you can use that here. You know, here's the takeaway, because you can't, like, Korean food is hard to translate here. A lot of the ingredients, some other things. So, but there are things about it you can learn and implement. So my job is to figure out what part of that works here, and give credit and context, but say, look, here's how you can take this idea and use it in your own home today. And that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do.
Have you watched any of the Italia Squisita videos? Have you seen those?
No.
So it's, I think you might enjoy them. Basically, they take the top 3 non-Italian YouTube videos about a particular Italian dish, and then they show them to a bunch of non-English speaking, for the most part, Italian chefs in Italy who have particular, are known for, cooking that particular dish. No. And they lose their minds. They just start, no, why is she doing that? That kind of thing. There is this whole growth of an industry here in America where it's all these, YouTube videos and the like that people can pull up and search for famous dish names. And the advice is often extremely uneven, particularly on even the most, sort of popular versions of this, is what's the best way to go about correcting this? Because it's now, I'll tell you an example of how much it's seeped into the consciousness of these videos. The fellow Andrew Ray, who does Binging with Babish, actually redid one of his recipes because they ran it on Italian squeeze. It was an earlier one, and he was so embarrassed that he said, I've got to do this again so that these old Italians stop yelling at me. So what can be done to sort of give people more guidance on that? How should they, how can it, help folks along so that they're not, accidentally ruining their pasta in ways that could be easily avoided?
Well, I mean, we live in a consumer society, where as consumers, you can go on YouTube and find 25 ways to make cacio e pepe.
Yes.
Now, I just saw a video that was like head slapping. Wow, that was really interesting how they did it. But and most people do it the wrong way. But I think in a way, in our society, it's up to the consumer. Has a lot of choices, so you can, for example, are you going to take all of Italian American cooking and throw it out the window because it's not authentic Italian? Like they make pesto differently. They do a lot of things differently, So the pizza da Michele's in Naples is soggy in the center because they use fresh buffalo mozzarella, which is wet, and so everyone's eating pizza with a knife and fork because the center isn't crisp. Well, that's traditional there. Well, if you go to Avenue J in Brooklyn, and you can get a pretty good, you can get some great pizza here. So who's right? I mean, okay, it's not the authentic way that it is in Naples, but do we care necessarily? I mean, it's okay. We care, but it's perfectly fine to have a different version here. So the question really becomes, what is the right way? And that's a complicated question. Is it the most authentic way? Or is it the way that gives you a result that you prefer? Do you want a crispy crust pizza, or do you want the authentic Naples pizza? Well, I don't know. I mean, that's up to you. So I think let's put that aside. Then there's the issue of like bad recipes versus good recipes, which is sort of what you're suggesting. That's hard. That's really a question of being, I would go to a place like Serious Eats, for example. I love their work, and and I love Kenji's work. So anytime I have a question, I go look at what Kenji did on Serious Eats. So you have your people you trust. Maybe you trust Chef Pepin, maybe you trust whomever. So you just got to find the people you trust and go with them. But everyone's free to create bad recipes. I mean, right? It's just up to us to figure out which ones are the good ones. But that's your job and my job.
Speaking of bad recipes, is there one thing about any particular, very commonly made home meal, home dish, you mentioned cacio e pepe, that you try to, say, tell your friends, don't do X, don't, when they're making this, this thing that everybody makes or something that's very common, this is the most common mistake in the world, or the most common piece of bad advice in a recipe in the world, avoid it. Is there something that falls in that category?
Yeah, there's the one for years. It's making pie dough, and they always say cut in the butter until it's the size of small peas.
Yes. Don't
add too much water. And whoever said that should be put on a small island for a really long time with only a limited amount of food. The reason is that if you coat the flour with fat, it's going to be easier to work with. It's going to roll out better. You're going to get it into the pan. It's going to be much more malleable. And two, if you don't add enough water, it's going to fall apart when you roll it out. So everyone says, well, if you add too much water, it's going to develop gluten. Please, there's plenty of fat in the pie dough. You don't really have to worry about that. So I would say that direction was written for somebody who's an expert. And the big, long, flaky pie dough, the French don't have flaky pie dough. They have short crust. Mm-hmm. So don't worry about it. I mean, just create a dough you can work with and get in the pan. It'll be fine. But those are one of those things that every time you pick up a pie pastry recipe, it'll say process until the butter is the size of small peas. First of all, what's the size of a pea? Is it a black-eyed pea? What is it? I don't know. So that would be one. The other is, sauteing the meat for stews. You don't need to do that. That's something you can avoid entirely. But I would say the pie dough is on my top of my list.
So I'm going to go to some questions now that are from readers and listeners. One is, why do Americans add oil to the pasta water? And should you?
Yeah, I don't know. That's an excellent question. No, you shouldn't, because you should also cook pasta in less water than you think. You want the starch from the pasta to make the water starchy, because when you combine the slightly undercooked pasta with the sauce in the pot or skillet, you then add back some of that cooking liquid, which is highly starched, so the sauce clings to the pasta. So putting oil in the water is I don't know where it came from, but that would be, again, one of the top 5 dumb things to do when cooking pasta. Yeah.
Let's see. Can you put cheese on seafood dishes?
Well, I remember going to Rome for the first time or second time in the 80s, and with some friends, and we had a big meal for lunch, and they had the langoustine, and they put cheese on it, and I was going like, this is didn't understand it at all. I thought it was just a horrible thing we do here in America, and they did it, and I didn't like it. So the answer is no, please don't. But it was in an Italian restaurant, and maybe it was a tourist restaurant, but I have no idea why it was done there, but I would say no.
If God really loves us, why do thermometer probes break so easily?
That's quite insufficient faith, right? Yeah, you probably want to buy, a pretty, like, ThermoWorks makes the world's most expensive $100 digital thermometer with a 6-inch probe that really works great. There are others that are in the $20 to $30 range. They make cheaper models. Buy one of those; they won't break.
What is stupider, different kinds of wine glasses for different varietals, or whiskey rocks?
Equally stupid. The idea that a white wine glass should have a narrower opening and a smaller bowl than red wine is ridiculous, because they both need to breathe. I use the same wine, and I would actually say the wine glass doesn't make that much difference anyway, unless it's champagne. What matters more is the temperature of the wine. Red and white wine should be both served around 55 degrees, slightly chilled. The white wine right out of the refrigerator is undrinkable, and a red wine at room temperature is undrinkable. So that would be more important to me. The whiskey rock, I don't know. I do think the size of ice cubes, though, matters a great deal in cocktails. I am a fanatic about that. But whiskey rocks, no, we can do without that.
I will admit, I have been gifted many whiskey rocks that remain in their packaging unopened.
That's where they should. That's what they should.
No offense if anyone listening gave me any. On the wine glass point, you said you use the same one. Do you have a favorite type or?
Yeah, it's sort of in between the big bold red wine and the more narrow white wine. It's sort of an in-between shape, and it's fine. I think it should be relatively large. You can get your nose in there to smell it and enjoy the aroma. But I don't like the narrow ones, and I don't like the really huge ones. So I like it in between, and that's fine. I mean, if you talk to most wine aficionados, they use the same glass for both.
Are you pro or anti-injection prior to smoking meat, such as brisket, pork belly, turkey, etc.?
Well, I used to do a pig roast every August in Vermont, and I'd have an 80-pound pig, and I used to inject it with the saline solution with bitter oranges and everything else. I could never tell a difference. I just think it wasn't worth it, especially if you have something like pork, which has got a lot of fat. Just make sure you cook it long enough. It'll be fine. So I don't think you need to inject it.
Christmas approaching. It's also hunting season. Is there actually a good way to cook a goose? I swear I stopped shooting them because they suck so bad.
They do. I would do a duck before a goose. Both duck and geese, I found, the two things. You can put it in simmering water for about half an hour to get rid of some of that fat, under the skin, and then roast it. I find that works really well. When I did that Fanny Farmer dinner years ago, that huge project, we did a goose, and what she did was to take the breasts off and cook them on top of the stove until medium rare, and then roasted the heck out of the legs in the oven. But you separate the legs and the breast, and that seems to work pretty well.
And as long as we're on that, what is your favorite, or do you have a favorite game meat? If people wanted to try that in terms of a holiday dinner or something special.
Well, I just finished, rifle season just ended actually last Sunday, so I'm a big venison fan. But I think my favorite game meat's rabbit. Rabbit season's open now. I start after Christmas in Vermont. Wild rabbit's just phenomenal. I mean, the trick is you take the tenderloin, those muscles, and cook that for about 4 minutes at the end. And then you cook the legs like the goose. You cook the legs for a longer time. You braise the legs and then add the back strap, the tenderloin at the last minute. But I think that's my favorite. Venison, the only problem with venison is it's lean. The tenderloin's great because you can do it over high heat very quickly until it's medium rare. The rest of the leg meat is tough. You can braise it very slowly, but it's still, it's going to be on the tough side because there's not a lot of fat in it. But I do like the taste a lot.
Do you enjoy hunting in Vermont?
It's my favorite thing. I just spent 5 11-hour days in the woods. One morning at 6 o'clock, pouring rain, 40 degrees, 12 feet up in a tree. I was just happy as a clam. People don't understand hunting. They think it's about shooting. I didn't even shoot once. I saw lots of deer, but none with horns. It's all about being in the woods, reading the signs, trying to figure out where the deer are going to be, where they are at certain times of the day. There's a lot to know. And so, for example, if you're walking in the woods, you're going to get me started. I'll try to wrap this up fast.
Oh, no. I'm interested in this. Keep going.
Well, there are 3 ways to hunt. You can hunt in a tree stand, which I don't like because you're just sitting there. But deer do not look up in trees. So you have that advantage. You can hunt in a blind, which is a pup tent that's camo, which I really hate because you can't see very well and you can't hear very well. And I don't like that. Or you can walk, which is what I prefer. But you take 4 or 5 steps very slowly and you stop for about 10 seconds. And you look around and listen. And that's how you move through the woods very, very slowly. And the trick is to see something 200 yards out or 250 yards out before they see you. And that's the trick of that. And you really have to get good at that because otherwise you'll just spook the deer, But how many thousands of deer have watched me walk by that I didn't see, because I was too dumb to pay attention. So you have to pay attention. And if you're out in the woods for 10, 11 hours, you are at full attention for 11 hours, looking, listening, being careful. And everything else in your life does not exist for that time. It's like scuba diving, you're focused. So I love it.
What do you take to eat while you're going on that 10-hour period?
That's an opportunity for alfresco dining. Anything that doesn't make noise when you open the package or eat it. Mm-hmm. So I actually make a lot of sandwiches. You can't, a friend of mine was hunting years ago. He was up in a tree stand and he opened a little package of, peanut butter crackers, and that sound spooked a huge buck 60 yards away. It was hiding in the underbrush and he just took off. So everything you have to bring is got to be quiet. So I bring apple, I bring sandwiches, I bring coffee, I bring water. So I got a moving refrigerator out there when I'm out, a big backpack.
When, do you have a favorite firearm that you like to hunt with, especially during the season? Or?
Yeah, I have a 7mm lightweight Browning. It's a 7mm 08 as a clip with 4, 1 in the chamber, but it's a lightweight version of it, so it's easy to carry around, which is really important because I do have a backpack, and I've learned over the years, I carry 2 flashlights, a compass, matches, and I have all that stuff because I was coming back a week ago after dark. It was sleeting, and I had a little headlamp on, and you're in the middle of the woods, and in 2 minutes you can get turned around, even if you know the woods well. I did actually, wasn't quite sure where I was. So I stopped, got my compass out, made sure I was going northwest, put it back. So you just want to be prepared, because even the best hunters, at different times of the year, the woods look different. Even if I've hunted my whole life in the same woods, but it's easy to get lost. So you want to be careful.
Have you always been a loner when it came to hunting?
Well, nobody hunts with other people when you're deer hunting.
Yes.
Well, let's put that up, because if you saw a buck, who's going to take the shot, right? You have to shoot the other guy first, then take the shot. Rabbit hunting is a very convivial sport, because you can make as much noise as you want and talk. So those are just two different ways of doing it. I mean, obviously trout fishing is a singular sport too, but there's something about being in the woods by yourself for 12 hours a day, 11 hours, there's just nothing like it. It's just terrific.
Back to some of the questions. Let's see. Do all people's enamel cast iron cookware get chipped, or did I get the wrong kind, or do I bang them up too much and need to be more careful?
They shouldn't chip if you get, what's the French brand?
Le Creuset?
It was Le Creuset, and there's...
Oh, I know what you're trying to think of. Yes.
Anyway, they seem to have a surface that never really chips.
Yeah.
It's great. Le Creuset, I've had a Le Creuset for years. I have a 7-quart, and it doesn't chip. I mean, it's going to get people worry about it. Doesn't look new, but that's
not supposed to look new. It isn't.
It's not supposed to look new. So yeah.
Let's see. Baked potatoes. Cook them in foil or uncovered.
Uncovered, please.
Yeah. Yes. I had two questions that were both. My mother says aluminum pans are dangerous. Some version of that, basically.
Well, a lot of restaurants use aluminum skillets. 2, there's never been any proof that there's a link between aluminum and Alzheimer's or whatever it was. I don't think that's ever been proven. I would personally use a stainless steel pan with a sandwich of aluminum inside, which is 3-ply, called 3-ply, or 5-ply if it's got more layers. Just because. Mm-hmm. And I would spend on a 12-inch skillet. I would spend a lot of money on a good 12-inch 3-ply skillet, heavy duty. You also want a heavy duty, because if you take a hot skillet and put it in a cold sink, once it warps, the center gets higher. Then you put olive oil in or whatever, and it all goes to the perimeter of the pan, and you've ruined the pan. So I would spend money on that, but I would use stainless with a wedge inside of aluminum.
What are some of the on-ramps in terms of dishes where you can move from doing typical Midwestern, Middle American cooking, casseroles and the like, into slightly more exotic things, sort of trending your family in that direction? What's a good starting dish, or a couple of dishes that could fall into that category?
Stir-fried rice. I mean, once you figure out the basic recipe, you can make 1,000 dishes out of that, right? I mean, that's really simple to do. I think just getting the basic stew concept down. Once you understand the basic concept, you can make 1,000 different recipes, and then you could add the harissa or the gochujang, or you can add any kind of spice you want to it. So I think the stew is one of those template dishes where you can make 1,000,000 of them. I mean, something simple like an omelets or scrambled eggs. I mean, you can make a ton of varieties of that, and every culture has a version. Chicken soup is like every culture has chicken soup, right? Mm-hmm. Just about. And you can travel the world on chicken soup. I think someone actually wrote a book about that a couple of years ago. So I would say that's also one of the recipes that you can easily change up.
Mm-hmm. Related to that, how do you get kids to eat and like curry? I would have thought mine would love it, but they're mostly weird about even the easiest Indian food.
I have 6 kids, and I don't have an answer to that question. I would say stop worrying about it. And I would also say don't make 2 meals, make dinner. And yeah, I mean, unless it's got tons of chilies in it, or something strange. And that's dinner. So if it's curry for dinner, it's curry for dinner. And if my rule always was, if you don't want to eat dinner, there's an apple and a pear. You can have fruit, for dinner. That's fine, but we're not going to make you a kid's. There's no Happy Meals.
Yeah.
And I think, I talked to Kenji Lopez-Alt recently about this on our show, and he said, he's got a 3.5-year-old daughter. She eats what they eat because there was no other choice. And she's now gotten to the point where she likes it. I talked to a scientist about this who said when kids are 1.5 to 2, under 2 years old, they're pretty open to different flavors. They might not like it the first time, but you give it to them the second time, and they'll actually like it. That 2.5 to 4, no. But once they hit about 4, then they're open to it again. So get kids when they're younger. They start to eat solid food. Introduce them to a lot of stuff, and I think that's the way to go. Because Kenji certainly figured it out, or he's lying to me, which is also that's possible.
No, I don't think he is, because I watch a lot of his little at-home videos, and he will mention that regularly. So, why do crappy dive diner scrambled eggs taste so good?
Because they put a lot of ketchup on it. I don't know.
I don't know.
I don't think they do, because they overcook them.
Yeah, that's been my experience.
I like, there's a Catalan recipe where you heat 2 tablespoons of oil to just about smoking, and you put the eggs in. And since oil gets hotter than butter because there's no water in it,
yep.
The liquid in the eggs fluffs up and steam, and you get this fluffy eggs. And I cook mine in an 8-inch carbon steel pan, and it takes about 12 seconds to cook 2 eggs. It's really quick. And I undercook them. The French refer to it as snotty eggs, which isn't very appealing, but I like them wet. But I think in a diner, they don't serve wet eggs. So I'm not sure I agree with that.
One cooking friend finds too many recipes that are found online are chronically under-seasoned. Is there any pressure to tone down spiciness or the like on the food media industry?
Well, yeah, I mean, the salt is the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone got, this whole salt sugar thing, and salt lost, and now sugar's losing, but everyone was undersalting everything, I think. And so my recommendation is, if it's a soup or stew or a skillet dish, something you can salt at the end, make sure you taste it before you serve it and up the ante on the salt. But I would say virtually all the recipes I see are definitely undersalted. In terms of underspiced, I'm not sure about that. I think, big, heavy amounts of spice Americans seem to like. Although I have to say, if you look at other cultures, there's a lot of recipes, like going back to Dora Watt, where you have half a cup of spice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, literally, like smoked paprika, etc. You have tablespoons of spice. And if you look at traditionally what we have here, European cooking, it's a half a teaspoon. So you can use a lot of spice depending on what it is, and it can be delicious. So I think our history here, in Northern Europe, spice was, pepper, salt, nutmeg, cinnamon. I don't know. They weren't on the spice road, so maybe they missed out. But, it's like salt and pepper. Why do they go together? They have nothing in common. Salt is just its own thing.
Mm-hmm.
In the Middle East, it's salt and cumin, right? Those are what they put together. So I think we're kind of messed up about spice in general, and we need to use more of it.
Just a couple more. I'm helping my dad design his kitchen right now. I gave him a set of knives to buy. He says all he needs expensively is a chef's knife, a cheap knife for beating up, and a bread knife. And then he wants to, if he can, to get a vegetable knife. What are the basics when it comes to buying knives for your kitchen? I know that you did a whole thing a couple of years ago, either at ATK or some in a different context, that was about why you shouldn't buy the kitchen block, like the pre-made kitchen block of knives. What are your thoughts on knives today? Since those are such a staple of holiday gift giving.
Kitchen blocks are how knife manufacturers get rid of the knives they can't sell. Mm-hmm. They put them in a block. That's what they do. My views on knives have completely changed. I'm not a fan of the European chef's knife anymore. Over the last 100 years, they've gotten heavier and heavier and heavier. They're 10 to 12 ounces. If you're Jacques Pepin, it's not a problem. But it's like you've never driven a car and someone said, here's the keys to my Ferrari, go take it for a spin. They're dangerous because you don't feel like you have control over the knife, because you have this long blade and a short handle. So the knives I would buy is a nikiri. It's a Japanese vegetable knife. It's 2 inches deep. It's very thin blade. The problem with the European chef's knives, the blades are thick. Well, as you're pushing a lot of steel through food, it's hard to push through. The thinner the blade, there's less tension, right? So I would buy that. Chinese cleaver, a good one with a thin blade, will do almost everything. Those are the two I really like, and of course a bread knife. And I don't, you could get a santoku if you wanted, but I would stay away from the big, heavy European chef's knife. I think that's great for chefs. That's why it's called a chef's knife. I don't think it's good for people at home because they're dangerous. I mean, the Chinese cleaver's got a 4-inch blade, right?
Yeah.
So your hands are away from the cutting edge.
Mm-hmm.
So they're very safe. So and the nikiri and the Chinese cleaver are two knives I would definitely, and a paring knife, are things I would buy. And you can buy, by the way, Chinese cleaver for $20 or $30.
Yeah.
You know.
So this, I think, is a question that is very common among people, which is, I'd love recommendations for how to prep in advance for holiday hosting, so that while you actually have the people there to feed, you also get to spend time with them instead of the whole time in the kitchen cooking for them. You end up with great food after spending 6 hours in the kitchen, but then you don't get to see your sister for the next 6 months, that kind of thing.
Make a soup or a stew. Make a stew the day before because it'll taste better the next day. I mean, that's what I do. I make one pot meals for that as much as possible. Do not do anything in a skillet. Do not do a saute. Do not do a stir fry. Don't do anything that's cooked at the last minute. So I make something that I can make the night before or that morning, put it aside, and then reheat it. And also, roasts, which nobody makes anymore. Roasts are great because there's no work. You throw it in the oven and then you just take it out of the oven and let it rest. But I would try to do a soup or a stew, or a big soup or a stew is really the way to go. And I mean, do never, if you're having people over, do not have anything that's last minute. Mm-hmm. I mean, except making cocktails, but that's last minute. But just stay away from that stuff. And it's a very simple rule, but it works.
Last question. What is your favorite cocktail for the Christmas season?
Well, I have a favorite cocktail 12 months out of the year, which is the old fashioned. Yes. But I'm a real pain about, I'm persnickety about how to do it. It's half bourbon, half rye. I like the spiciness of the rye. I use orange bitters and regular bitters. I use just a little bit of sweetness, not too much. And I know this is terrible. I either stir it with ice ahead of time or shake it briefly in a shaker, because I want to dilute the alcohol level a little bit, mm-hmm. so you can taste the flavors of the alcohol, which goes against every rule, and just the right size ice cubes. And as they said in the 1925, I think, Savoy cocktail book, drink it cold and drink it fast.
Thank you so much, Christopher Kimball, for taking the time to join us again. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm Ben Domenech. You've been listening to another edition of the Federalist Radio Hour. We'll be back soon with more. Until then, be lovers of freedom and anxious for the fray.